Clearcoats can be a challenging part of the weathering process despite being almost invisible on a model. So here is some clarity on Clearcoats, coming up now on JC's Rip Track. Hi there, my name is John and welcome to JC's Rip Track. If this is your first time here, this channel is all about advice and tips on transforming your plastic models into something that looks like it belongs on the rails today. If you want to follow along, then please click on subscribe and that little bell icon so you can receive a notification every time I upload a new video. So what sort of clear coats do you use on your models? Have you had any triumphs or disasters? Please let me know in the comments section below. On more than a few occasions over the past 3 years, I have had to help a bottler diagnose a problem that they have had while weathering a model. More often than not, something has gone sideways when applying a clear coat. If this has been you, don't worry, you're not alone. Clear coats are trickier to use than we might think, as the wrong combination of materials can negatively affect your work. However, a good clear coat can not only protect your model, but can enhance its look and is part of the weathering process. Still, there are several misunderstandings about what clear coats are, and it matters what you use and when you use them. So before I get into some specifics, let's look at what clear coats are and what they can do. And when I first got into modeling, a clear coat was only ever a finishing step. When I finished painting, I'd either spray it down with either Tester's Dull Coat or Games Workshop's Purity Seal as a final step. And that was it. However, as I delved deeper into learning different modeling techniques, clear coats became not just a finishing step, but an integral part of the painting and weathering process. And it made a difference in what kind of clear coat I would use and when. Not only that, the chemical properties of a specific clear coat are also a factor when choosing what you should use on your model. So I'm going to cover the different types of clear coats and their best uses, some common problems that happen with clear coats, and some suggestions on how to avoid them or how to fix them. And lastly, a quick survey of some clear coats that I have used with some degree of success. I need to do a quick aside about the term dull coat. Some modelers use the term to represent any flat clear coat, kind of like Band-Aid when it's talking about any sort of bandage or medical wrapping. However, using the word in a generic sense is one reason why modelers may get into trouble. And this is one place as a modeler that you need to be careful with for a few reasons that will become clearer by the end of this video. Whenever I use the term, I specifically am referring to Tester's Dull Coat, a brand-specific lacquer-based flat clear coat manufactured by the Testers Corporation. I often refer to clear coats in three broad categories: flat or matte coats, satin coats, and gloss coats. The truth is, there's a sliding scale with gloss coats on one end and flat coats on the other, with satin coats being somewhere in the middle. They are all some sort of chemical medium that is clear when it dries, and some clear coats have a milky consistency when you apply it, but will dry clear after application, and others simply go on clear. The difference between them is how rough the surface is at a microscopic level when it dries, and that roughness affects how the surface reflects or scatters light. The smoother the clear coat, the more it reflects the light in the same direction, and the shinier it looks. Conversely, the rougher the surface, the more it scatters light and the flatter it looks. A clear coat's smooth or rough quality suits specific techniques better. Gloss clear coats create a smooth, shiny surface on a model and work well when that kind of texture is needed. Aircraft canopies and windows are examples of textures on a model that benefit from a clear coat. In fact, that's what you want to use. But it goes beyond that. Usually, a gloss clear coat is best suited when preparing a surface to receive a decal and sealing it once dried. Additionally, the smooth surface works well with oil or enamel-based products, as the surface tension of these products is so much lower than water-based projects. Finally, gloss coats shine when combined with oil or enamel pin washes, and they can create a capillary type action where the paint material hugs the recessed areas of detail without staining the broader surfaces, giving you some very precise detail work. On the other hand, if you use water-based projects on a smooth surface, you run a significant risk of having the material simply bead up on the surface rather than having it go where you need it to go. So you're best to use gloss coats when the steps to follow involve either decals or oil-based paints, and they are also good to seal in decals after you have applied them. On the other end of the scale, flat clear coats appear that way because they are designed to produce a rough texture when dry. It scatters light, giving a non-reflective look on a surface. They work well for unifying a painted surface work and take off any toy-like shine on a model to help create the illusion of scale. More often than not, flat clear coats can be close to a final step in modeling, especially in model railroading, as a shiny surface does not scale well as a glossy surface. For many model railroaders, the only weathering step that they do is to spray their rolling stock with Tester's dull coat, which can go a surprisingly long way in adding realism to a model railroad because it kills the shine. However, it goes well beyond that. The rougher the texture of a flat clear coat is also well suited for accepting paints or mediums that need a more irregular surface. For example, acrylics and gouache paints benefit nicely from a flat clear coat. That rougher surface texture is what they need. Similarly, weathering pencils, weathering powders, and pan pastels all need a rough texture for the material to stick to. Satin clear coats are a middle ground between gloss and flat clear coats. Their surface is smoother than matte, but rougher than a gloss. This kind of clear coat is good if you want to use oil-based washes or techniques, but you want to have the oil paint slightly stain the model. Certain types of oil-based rust streaks, for example, benefit nicely from a satin clear coat as a base. Another place that is good to use a satin coat? A model intended to look like it's fresh out of the shop. Such models would be pretty glossy in real life, but satin clear coats scale better for this purpose. Even brand new locomotives with a lustrous sheen on them don't look as shiny when observed from a distance, and remember, when doing model railroading, that's effectively what you're doing. Now, another quick aside. Chemical properties matter. Before I get into some of the properties one can encounter with clear coats, it is critical to pay attention to the chemical composition of the clear coat you're using. An acrylic flat clear coat behaves differently than a lacquer-based flat clear coat, even if the intended result is the same. What you use to thin a clear coat, for example, also matters. The propellant in a spray can matters. In fact, either not being aware of chemical properties of a clear coat or deliberately ignoring it leads to some of the common problems that I've had to deal with and I'm going to cover here. While there can be several issues that arise with clear coats, here are some of the most common ones that you may encounter. Frosting most often happens with flat clear coats and occasionally with satin. Essentially, it means that the surface of the model is too rough at a microscopic level, and it scatters and reflects more light before the painted surface of the model has a chance to absorb it. Depending on how severe it is, frosting makes the model surface look like it is covered with a fine white powder or frost, hence the name. There are a couple of different ways that frosting happens, and when using a spray can as a clear coat, it could be a flaw with the can itself, or you've been spraying in high humidity and there's too much distance between the spray nozzle and the model itself. The lacquer spray catches the moisture in the air and reacts with it, and then the surface becomes excessively rough at a microscopic level, leaving a frosted look on the surface of the model. On the other hand, if airbrushing and home mixing, like I often do, it can mean that the ratio of materials that you're using to create a flat coat, such as Tamiya Flat Base and Future Pledge Revive It, isn't correct. That's when you can get frosting, and I'll detail that in the next step. Tamiya Flat Base is a great way to customize clear coats, but if there's too much of it in the mix, you can end up frosting your model, and trust me, I have done it. Now, a quick solution that may work is to spray the model with a gloss clear coat to smooth the surface again and let it dry before trying it again with a flat clear coat, because that kind of fills in the rough gaps for it. Now, crazing isn't a technical term, but it's a word that I use to describe what happens when there is a chemical reaction on the surface of your model that negatively affects the paint. You might know it by a different name, but it often happens when the clear coat contains material that reacts with something already on the model's surface. And I've received a few panicked messages and email where this has happened. And most often, someone has used a spray can of a lacquer clear coat over a surface where they had recently completed work using oil or enamel paints that hadn't fully cured. And sometimes this results in a bubbly mess that is hard to fix. And this is why the chemical properties matter. This is why you need to pay attention to it. The best way to avoid crazing or chemical reactions with clear coats is pay attention to what you're using. A good guideline is to avoid using lacquer-based clear coats over oil or enamel work, as that can react with the medium in the recently applied paint. And while it is not universally true, assume that any spray can-based clear coat is either lacquer or has something in it that would react with the oil or enamel work that you've just done. Specifically, Tester's Dull Coat is a lacquer flat coat, so it is a good chance to attack oil work, especially if it has not cured, which leads me to my next point. Another way to avoid crazing is to cure the work completely. When working with oils, it means let it dry for at least 24 hours. Now, it may slow your work down a bit, but it will reduce problems moving forward. Acrylics are less of a problem as they dry quickly and water doesn't reactivate them, so that you can both use lacquer and acrylic-based clear coats over acrylic paints without too much of an issue. I've had the most success sticking with acrylic-based clear coats when working with oil paints, and I'll get into some of my favorite mixes in just a moment. Orange peel is a bumpy surface on your model, and it can happen with both paint and clear coats. And while clear coats create a microscopically rough texture on your model, the orange peel look is not microscopic. You can see the bumps on the model surface that looks like the surface of an orange or a lemon. This is a common issue in both clear coats and in paint, but it is easily solved or easily prevented. That's probably the better thing. It means that the paint or the clear coat is not atomizing well through the airbrush. For a spray can, it means that there might be something wrong with the nozzle. For airbrushing, it means that the material being sprayed is too thick and isn't being broken down into tiny enough droplets to make the coverage even. The best solution is to thin the clear coat or the paint right down. And whether you're doing this with acrylic or lacquers, I usually try to thin my clear coats down to a 50-50 ratio of clear coat mixed to thinner, and I'll get to that in just a second. The last common problem with clear coats is weathering pigments or chalks. It's so common that some modelers just consider it part of the weathering process. If you've ever worked with weathering pigments or powders or pan pastels, you may notice that a clear coat mutes the effect of what you've just done, and in some cases it just seems to erase it altogether. This is not a clear coat problem, but an issue with the powders used. Not all pigments or powders are created equal. Any pastel or pigment that contains chalk is susceptible to dulling or even disappearing when coated with a clear coat. You see, the clear coat in a liquid form essentially fills in the surface of the chalk particles, turning them clear and reducing the intensity of the pigment. The process is a little bit more complicated than I've described, but the result is the same. Clear coats can make a pigment work almost disappear. And there are a couple of ways around it, and most model railroaders who use weathering pigments often apply the material, clear coat it, and then come back and add more pigment and keep doing this until they've built it up and they're happy with the result. The trouble is this can be cumbersome, and there are so many different techniques available to create even more realistic effects. Alternatively, using weathering-specific pigments such as those manufactured by Ammo by Mig or AK Interactive, for example, and then sealing them with one of their pigment fixtures first is another way to avoid the problem. In the latter case, these materials have a far lower chalk content, if at all, which reduces or even eliminates the issue that you're just getting pigment on the model and not having to deal with the properties of chalk. Now, this next category is highly subjective, as it is the clear coats that I have personally used and had the most effective results with. It is not a definitive list by any stretch, but I've used several of these materials to significant effect and had minimal issues. For spray cans, I have had the most luck with Games Workshop's spray-on clear coats, particularly their newer Munitorium varnish. It's the replacement for Purity Seal, and it is a smooth matte finish. It's not quite as flat as Tester's Dull Coat, but it is effective. And as a spray, I treat it as a lacquer-based varnish, so if I'm doing anything over oil-based work, I make sure that the coat has cured before it, or I've put something else over it first. Tester's Dull Coat and Gloss Coats are also decent sprays, and the flat finish from Dull Coat is almost as matte as one can get without frosting the model. Just remember what I said earlier. Dull Coat is a brand name, so be careful with other flat finishes out there. You're best to experiment with brands, including well-known ones like Krylon, on models that you're not sure of yet. Test them first. Although truthfully, I prefer to use Clearcoats that I shoot through my airbrushes for greater control. Specifically, I have had good results using Pledge Revive It, an acrylic floor polish that was once called Future. Unfortunately, the brand name varies from country to country, so Pledge Revive It is just how it's known in the United States and Canada. I'll have a link below to help you find its equivalent if you're outside of North America. Now, the stuff out of the bottle is a water-soluble clear acrylic, which means it can go over acrylic or oil work without attacking the layer below it, and gives a solid protection that will not yellow over time. Out of the bottle, it is a high gloss finish. The real magic happens when you mix it with Tamiya's X21 flat base at different ratios, which can give a sliding scale of finishes from satin to dead flat. I mean, using it out of the bottle by itself, it's just gloss coat. But it does mean that I can customize it to whatever I need it to be. For example, 3 parts Future to 1 part flat base is a dead flat finish. A ratio of any less than that runs the risk of frosting. When working with flat coats, you'll want to work with a ratio of about 5 to 1 and higher for most of the time. I wouldn't go any lower than 5, even though I've gone as low as 3 to 1. Because even a 10 to 1 ratio is a pretty flat to satin finish, and while 15 to 1 gives you a nice satin coat. And regardless of what ratio I use, I make sure to thin the mixture that I've made 50-50 with 91% alcohol to get it to apply smoothly. And this ratio is true of whatever mix I'm trying to make with it. Without thinning, you run the risk of having an orange peel finish. Now, when I don't have time to mix my own or I don't need a lot of it, I keep jars of both Tamiya Flat Clear and Clear on hand for quick jobs. And I then thin it with 91% alcohol or Tamiya's X20 thinner rather than their lacquer thinner to ensure that it won't attack any oil work. So I hope this gives you some clarity on Clearcoats. In almost every piece you've seen me do, the Clearcoats might seem like a break or an intermediary step. Still, they are necessary for a weathering process that uses both oil and acrylics in an alternating pattern. Now let me know your questions or challenges in the comments section below if there's anything that this has raised for you. So I hope you found this a helpful guide for some of your modeling and weathering projects. And if you want more tips on how to get the most out of your weathering and painting projects, don't forget to hit subscribe and the little bell icon so you won't miss any upcoming videos. You can also check out my other videos and social media links below if you haven't done so already. And you can become involved in this channel's creative process by checking out my Patreon page and possibly becoming a supporter. So thanks so much for watching. Good luck, and may you keep on track.